Good morning, Bore da, and a very warm welcome to day 3 of this week's Green Ambition series. It's beautifully sunny here in Cardiff again. I hope it's nice wherever you are. Bore da chi, croeso cynnes iawn i'r trydydd diwrnod o'n cyfres gweledigaeth werdd sy'n cael ei chynnal yr wythnos hon. We're going to be looking at circular economy and industrial symbiosis this morning. But first, here's television presenter, author and naturalist Iolo Williams to officially welcome you to this morning's session. The welcome is in Welsh with English subtitles, but then the rest of today's sessions and tomorrow's event will be held in English. Mae croeso wrth gwrs i chi gysylltu gyda ni yn Gymraeg. Os oes da chi gan ddefnyddio'r cyfleuster cwestiwn ag ateb, you're more than welcome to correspond with us in Welsh if you prefer.
Helo na, a croeso I gyfres y weledigaeth werdd busnes Cymru. Iolo Williams ydw I, a dwi'n falch o gyflwyno'r gyfres ddiddorol hon o ddigwyddiadau a greuwyd I gynorthwyo busnesau I ddod yn fwy effeithlon o ran adnoddau. Os ydych chi, fel finnau, a diddordeb brwd mewn cynaladwyedd ac effaith amgylcheddol, yna bydd y gyfres hon yn darparu arweiniad a chymorth i'ch helpu I wneud newidiadau yn eich busnes. Mae tîm arbenigol Busnes Cymru wrth law I gynnig sesiynau cyngor un I un unigryw. Felly, os ydych chi wedi eich ysbrydoli gan yr hyn a glywch chi heddiw, yna cysylltwch â'r tîm I archebu eich sesiwn rhad ac am ddim, lle bydd cynghorwyr yn eich helpu I fapio'ch gweledigaeth werdd a symud ymlaen tuag at ddod yn fusnes fwy effeithlon o ran adnoddau. Pob lwc a diolch yn fawr I chi.
Diolch yn fawr, Iolo. Thank you very much, Iolo. And thank you also to Business Wales for organising this event. So Business Wales is a free service that provides impartial, independent support and advice to people starting, running and growing a business in Wales. It's funded by the Welsh Government and European Regional Development Fund and has an excellent track record for providing innovative events like this series this week and training sessions. So let's go in. Amser felly I ddechrau bore yma. This morning's session is delivered by decarbonisation and circular economy experts from the South Wales Industrial Cluster, Celsa Steel and Swans University, and will be covering the following topics. What is the circular economy and how does it relate to industry? What are the links with SWIC and Wales in general, including the new Cardiff Circular Economy Network? How does this relate to the RICE project? And what other opportunities are being explored or should be explored going forward? The session is being hosted by Hannah Watts from ERM, and there'll be an opportunity for live question and answers at the end.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining the session today. We'll be discussing the circular economy and industrial symbiosis. My name is Hannah Watts. I work for ERM, with the world's largest pure play sustainability consultancy, and I'll be chairing the discussion today. I'm going to now hand over to our panel members so they can introduce themselves. If I can start with Chris, and then we can move to Andrew, and then we can move to Owen.
Hello, I'm Chris Williams, Head of Industrial Decarbonisation for Industry Wales and the nominated lead for the South Wales Industrial Cluster. I'll hand over to Andrew.
I'm Professor Barron. I'm the Cymru Chair of Low Carbon Energy and Environment, and Director of the Energy Safety Research Institute, as well as the Principal Investigator of what's called the RICE project, Reducing Industrial Carbon Emissions. Over to Owen.
Hi, I'm Owen Bailey. I'm the Innovation Manager for Celsa Steel. We are a steel producer based in Cardiff, and we are also the largest recycler of material in the UK, processing over 1 million tonnes of scrap every year. My remit within Celsa is to look at all things about innovation and how they can improve the process and activities of what we do, but also looking at circular economy and how we can embrace the principles and activities around circular economy and share that knowledge with the rest of Wales. Okay,
thank you for introducing yourself. So firstly, I would just like to hand back to Owen so he can just talk to what the circular economy is and how it relates to industry.
Thanks, Hannah. Well, the circular economy is a major issue. I'm sorry, guys, I'm getting a really bad echo in my ear. I'm just hearing myself constantly.
Okay, maybe we should...
Well, it echoed. But I'm not getting the echo anymore.
I'm hearing myself. when I speak.
We
It's not
can't hear
now. It's
that,
fine.
the interesting thing. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
fine now for some reason. It's okay now, but when I was speaking just now, just there, I was getting, yeah.
Okay, do you want to try and continue, Owen, see if it gets better?
Okay, we'll try it now. Right, give it a second, and I'll go again. So the circular economy, it's a quite an important subject at the moment, and for me, it's been an important subject for quite a long time. I've been developing solutions and exploring the circular economy and how we can improve what we do and the way we do it for a number of years now. But for me, the circular economy is ultimately it's a global economy that is circular by nature, and the economy is the key aspect. I think for anyone to truly understand what circular economy is, we need to understand what the opposite to that is, which is the linear economy. And the linear economy is what we've been doing for over 300 years. In fact, probably even longer than that. It's been around from the time we started taking wood and stone from the earth and using it to make weapons and tools to go hunting with. And all we've really done since that point is continue the same process, but in a much more manufactured and industrialized way. And it all kind of kicked off to be where we are today, in my opinion, based upon a gentleman called John Locke, who's an English philosopher who suggested that nature in isolation had no inherent value to humanity. It's only when labor was added to those natural resources was any assumed value. And therein lies our economic systems and structures, and ultimately everything we've done since then has been driven for industry. It's been driven to sell and buy and sell more and more stuff, and that's where we've seen the assumed value, the GDP of nations is based upon us being able to sell stuff. Now, circularity, and it includes the elements around our latest technologies around renewables and stuff. It's still based upon the linear economy. Where we're trying to get to with the circular economy is to understand the full life cycle of what we do and understand the value of the resources that we have, and not just at the point of sale, but across their full and entire life cycle. And so for industry, particularly processing industries that we have quite a lot of in Wales, South Wales, for those organizations to understand what circularity means would give them an opportunity to build a foundation for delivering circular solutions throughout the entirety of the Welsh economy, the Welsh regions, but also the UK economy. But we also need to understand the additional values that exist within the concept of a circular economy. In that we can address lots of environmental issues, we can address social issues, we can look at equality across supply chains, and we can start to developing solutions that are more beneficial to society in the future and ultimately to future generations. One of the key aspects of circularity is to develop collaboration and to deliver solutions through collaboration. In essence, no individual organization can deliver circularity in isolation. They need to be able to collaborate with their entire supply chain to be able to engage and ultimately then share the value across that supply chain. So this is where I feel circular economy can pay real real sustainable benefits for society. But to transition to that end goal, we need to start engaging across. We need to start having more kind of more discussions about how we can do things together and not trying to assume that we can only do things in isolation. I include decarbonization in this concept as well, in that if we decarbonize a linear economy, we're decarbonizing a broken system. So we need to try and transition to this circularity and so therefore decarbonize the new system, the new system going forward. I think I was asked recently about the UN sustainability goals, the 17 goals that we have. And in essence, the linear economy is the reason why we have these 17 goals, the reason why we have poverty and why we have issues around climate change is because the linear economy has created these. And ultimately, if we look at the circular economy as a solution or a counter to these, we hopefully in the future we will be in a situation where we won't need to have 17 UN sustainable development goals. So yeah, I think there's huge opportunity for us, but we need to embrace the true essence of circularity. It's certainly not just about recycling; it's about much more. Hopefully, that gives you a flavour.
That's great. Thank you, Owen. And just to pick up on a couple of those points on, as you mentioned, it's all about developing that collaboration and having those conversations with industry of all sizes. As you mentioned, no one organisation can deliver circular economy in isolation. So I'm just going to hand over to Chris now. Chris, I think, as some people may or may not be aware, we've got the South Wales Industrial Cluster here in the region. So if you could just give an overview of SWIC and how we're using the cluster to develop this collaborative approach and start engaging with industries in the topic of circular economy.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. I'll actually start by jumping forward a bit, actually, because Professor Andrew Barron, who's going to talk later about RICE, as we were conceiving RICE and talking through and developing what that would look like and include, through that process, we wanted to learn quite a lot about industrial symbiosis and circular economy. And that's where we started to identify the power of industry coming together to explore opportunities within specific regions. So as you say, I'll talk now about the developing South Wales Industrial Cluster, but I just wanted to mention the fact that actually partly started through the project that Andrew's going to talk about later. So SWIC, South Wales Industrial Cluster, is a developing relationship. It's a partnership between industry, academia, government, local and national. It covers really industry from Pembrokeshire to Monmouthshire, so Milford to Newport effectively in terms of the larger industries. But more and more industries are getting more engaged as we start to develop and move our way further forward. Its main focus is on developing net zero circular economy for the region. It partly started as well through the RICE project, but also there was a Flexis project as well, looking at energy systems and in particular de-risking decarbonisation. And through that project and through discussions with industry we started to identify really that each industry has their own options for getting to net zero, but that each individual industry can't really decide on its own which option it's going to choose. So it could be electrification, it could be hydrogen, it could be biogas. And it's only by working together with infrastructure providers that you start to understand really what the proper options are for each industry. So in terms of net zero, our industrial grouping are focusing on taking industry through what we call our 5 steps, which the first one is focusing on energy and resource efficiency. So in the context of industrial symbiosis, looking at what energy we can share, what resource we can share. We then went on to look at moving away from natural gas in terms of maybe electrification or maybe hydrogen or biofuels. Then we looked at industrial symbiosis around each individual industry. So what industries can you attract local to a big industry through symbiosis or sharing? So that could be waste heat, so that could be materials. Then we looked at carbon capture utilization. So how can we utilize CO2, any CO2 if it is still emitted? How can we repurpose that into chemical feedstocks or valuable chemical make? And lastly, carbon capture and storage. How are we going to store excessive amounts of CO2 that we can't do anything with? So those are the sort of 5 steps that we're focusing on in terms of achieving net zero. But then, as Owen said, as we're looking to transition from the linear economy and bend that into a circular economy, what of those 5 steps can we pull through to really really accelerate our motions? And what can we do as individual industries to help us move to that circular economy? Lots of us already work closely together. Lots of us already have zero to landfill targets and goals that we achieve regularly. But still, there will be opportunities for us to explore and develop and move our way forward with. So we knew we had to work together. So the Transforming Foundation Industries Fund that became available gave us the opportunity to start that process off. So we applied, we called the project South Wales with Both Eyes Open, and then we started to develop and map our region in terms of industrial energy flows, in terms of industrial material flows, and then really look to find opportunities in those for symbiosis, for R&D, for commercial application, or further work maybe that needed to be scaled up, or also maybe looking for smaller companies, SMEs, and other businesses that we could look to pull in to exploit those symbiosis opportunities. So as Welsh Government have got in their net zero plan, Team Wales, the sort of brand as it's becoming, is an important element of achieving net zero. So this TFI project, South Wales with Both Eyes Open, I suppose was a practice for us in team building as part of Team Wales. When unfortunately COVID hit as soon as the project started, so that in lots of ways completely changed track for how we had originally envisaged the project would move further forward. But having said that, it's still been really good at pulling the teams together. And in fact, in some ways, we've achieved maybe more than we would have if COVID wasn't in place. So coming back then, as Owen said, circular economy is vital in our vision. It's inbred into our net zero visioning and narrative and project plans. And by using the South Wales with Both Eyes Open project to map our energy flows within the region between industries, to look for symbiosis opportunities, what inward investment can we bring in, and maybe greenhouses from waste heat, or different chemical companies that could come in and process some of our byproducts that maybe could have more valuable products uses than they've got at the moment. In terms of then legals, we also looked at some of the legal aspects. What can we do legally? What boundaries and policies are there in place at the moment? And how can we, as a group, start to identify those, and what actions do we need to draw out of those in sort of a legal risk assessment? We worked with a legal company, Capital Law, on developing a way further forward. So out of that project, which finished, we're then building those actions into commercial opportunities, into further development with smaller companies and SMEs, but also then start to identify some university projects that our clever researchers can look to turn some of our byproducts, some of our unused opportunities into R&D projects and develop them further forward. So in summary, it was a good project for us. It did help towards Team Wales in that it got industry, academia, government working together in terms of energy mapping and materials mapping. It did identify some opportunities, and we're building those opportunities into our cluster plan as we look to move further forward. Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks, Chris. And just to add on to that, we have a report has been published as part of the TFI project that Chris has just described. So if there is anyone who would like to see a copy of that, please do feel free to reach out and we can pass that on. So just picking up on what you said at the beginning, and I'll hand over to Professor Andrew Barron to talk about the RISE project a little bit, as there were elements of the circular economy and industrial symbiosis thinking that came in as part of that.
Thank you, Hannah. And Chris is exactly right. Where we started with the RISE project, which stands for Reducing Industrial Carbon Emissions, came from a mapping exercise of all the waste products and material needs within the region, within South Wales. And what we did was started looking at, which companies produce what waste, how could that be used by other companies. And so it sort of started as a circular economy, but one of the things was, this is back in 2017, and we started the RISE project in 2018, was that, of course, the UK government had announced net zero as a legislation target, that the public and the governments tend to think more of energy production and transportation. But here in Wales, especially in South Wales, the majority of carbon emissions comes from industry. And so one of the things that, as PI, I believe, was that for South Wales, or for Wales in general, it was a unique opportunity to choose industry as the focus for decarbonisation, as opposed to looking at transportation and energy production. One of the problems, though, is, as I say, we started the project in 2018, made the proposal to the Welsh Government in 2017. So let's assume at that point there's 33 years to get to net zero. But if you talk to major industry, that is actually a tight time frame if you're going to start from scratch. So if you're starting from new technology that you're going out and researching to develop it to an industrial scale, to adopt it on a large scale, having started multiple companies globally, I can tell you that irrespective of the technology, except for software, you're looking at least a 10-year time frame from initial research results to a commercial product. And that doesn't even mean you've got full adoption. That just means a commercial product. And so one of the components of the RISE project became that it's essentially too late to talk about it. It's essentially too late to do research about it. The time is now that we need to de-risk technology. We need to implement the technology at least a scale that's economically and industrially viable, such that major industry in South Wales can assess that technology, determine the economic viability of it, determine the applicability for their particular needs, and therefore have a shortened time to adoption. And I must say it was quite nice prior to COP26 that the Queen, Her Majesty the Queen, was caught on open mic basically agreeing. I think her comment was something like, it's really irritating when they talk but they don't do. And so really the RISE project was about doing. It was about going out and creating industrial scale pilot, calling them pilot units is a bit disingenuous in a lot of cases, but essentially industrial scale demonstration units, and going through all the rigors of putting onto a major industrial site. So with that, we had two main focus areas. One was replacing carbon fuels, which essentially was green hydrogen. And then the other side is carbon utilization, carbon capture and utilization. And we looked at working with a number of different local industries, and we already have 3 that we're actively working on their locations. And part of the point of choosing multiple different industries was to be able to demonstrate the applicability of these technologies across the board. So, for example, our first demonstrator was at Hanson's aggregate facility in Port Talbot, right next to Tata Steel. We have integrated there a green hydrogen generation unit that has been now operational for over 2 years. It went through all the requirements for safety operation. We know that it now is reliable. It can integrate perfectly with Hanson's system. It actually has become one of the focal points for the UK government's hydrogen documentation. Their plan actually focused on the Hanson's demonstration as an example of how industry should look to start adopting technology. We also took the same technology. In the case of Hanson, they're using it as a replacement for natural gas directly as a fuel. We also put it at Valley's nickel refinery. And in that case, then we're inserting it into their hydrogen system. They actually make hydrogen from steam reforming. So in that case, we're replacing steam reforming as a component, and therefore the carbon emissions that come from that. But we're demonstrating that it can be used not only as a fuel, but in the case of Valley as a chemical. It's used as a reagent. So that provides the evidence to any other industries that this is, first of all, a reliable technology. It's scalable technology. The advantage with the Valley site, it's a COMA Tier 1 site, and therefore it's gone through all the safety and hazard requirements. It gives industry a comfort that adopting technologies such as this will be applicable to their environment. Where that came down to the circular economy actually came from another component of our demonstration, which is carbon utilization. and carbon capture. So, for example, at Valley, we have a carbon utilization system in place that's taking on a relatively large scale. That's what it's the largest biorefinery in the UK is taking carbon dioxide and turning it into a variety of different specialty and commodity chemicals, as well as food stocks for agriculture. And that leads me to, I think, one important point is we need to not just focus, for example, on industries. You need to focus on all the different environments in South Wales. And therefore, for example, agriculture becomes a major component. And how that then starts to become a circular economy is we're taking CO2 from industry. We're taking nitrates and phosphates from agriculture. The products we're making, some of those go back as feedstocks to agriculture. So suddenly you're starting to create that circular economy between agriculture and also major industry. The final two other projects, we have one at Tata Steel, which is to take blast furnace gas and convert it into acetic acid, which is one of the bulk chemicals consumed by industry all over the UK. And the last one is a bespoke technology development for carbon capture. And this actually is predating a UK government plan, which is still in the discussion stage for a large-scale demonstrator, in their case for liquid absorbents. We're doing solid absorbents. And the idea, this is going to be at Rockwell. We're in the process of building it. The location doesn't matter, it's going to be movable, but it's being designed such that SMEs and major industry who have developed new absorbents or new materials they believe can be better at carbon capture, we can actually install it and test it in an industrial environment at an industrial scale. But also we can look at optimizing processes for a specific industry. So for example, Rockwell's blast furnaces have a different gas output to Tata Steel's blast furnaces. And the solutions to that are going to be different. So it's really important to be able to provide, if you like, a bespoke service to industry to allow them to optimize their conditions. The last thing I'll mention is one of the things that's come out of the RISE project, and we talk about a symbiotic relationship between different industries, that we have industries producing one type of waste that is now going to be used for a different purpose with a different industry. But I think that needs to be broadened to agriculture, the healthcare system. We've got a program in place now, which is aligned to the RISE project, which is taking medical waste, plastic medical waste, and turning it into materials for the aerospace industry and the transportation industry. So we need to encompass a lot of different areas. The other thing, and with that in mind, I think that it's better to think of this as that you need not only a symbiotic relationship, which mutually benefits different groups, but we need to think of it in a holistic term, which considers the whole system. And the whole system, in our case, is South Wales, but I think we need to think of it across Wales and across the UK and do it as a system-wide approach. And we're starting now to get industry from not only from Wales, but from the rest of the UK, who are looking to join that symbiotic relationship with the units we've already got in place. So with that, I'll hand back to Owen.
Well, actually, if you don't mind, Andrew, I'm going to pull you up on one thing. And I know Chris and Hannah have heard this before. In the circular economy, waste doesn't exist. So I think we need to get used to changing our language and actually referring to things as valuable resources, despite the fact that we may not have figured out what the value is yet. It's still a resource. So I think the less we talk about waste, I think the better for everybody. I think we need to understand that there is value in everything we have, all the resources we have available to us. We just need to figure out what we're doing. One point I wanted to also add was we're talking about large industries here within the cluster, and yes, they create probably on mass the biggest impact, but we have a massive SME industrial base or SME businesses in Wales, in South Wales, and what we're trying to do to hopefully address and to share some of the knowledge with them is we're starting with the Cardiff Circular Economy Network, and actually kicks off this week. The first of the series of workshops kicks off this week, and it's about just engaging those SMEs with the principles of circularity and helping them to understand that they're part of the system as well, that they're part of the kind of links between those large organizations and end users, which rather than referring to them as consumers, I'd rather refer to them as citizens, because consumers really, we should only be consuming food, not products or services. I think we utilization of services, and we are citizens. So with the Cardiff Circular Economy Network, unfortunately, it's just for those organizations within the Cardiff region, within the Cardiff Council remit, because of the fund we had for this pilot project was from the Community Renewal Fund. It's a collaboration between ourselves at CELSA, Cardiff Metropolitan University, and Cardiff Council, in particular their One Planet Cardiff initiative and their Cardiff Commitment program. So we're coming together to support SMEs, but also schools, and so we're engaging with the teachers and hopefully helping those teachers to understand how they can apply the principles of circular economy to the new curriculum, which is coming out. So and obviously then we're linking into the future generations. We're linking into to those people who are going to be the industry leaders, business leaders, and political leaders of the future, and that if they have a base of knowledge which is around the principles of circular economy, then we can definitely see that we're putting ourselves in a much better position to move it forward. And one last point I would like to make on all of this is that the current British standard, a British guiding standard around circular economy, which is the 8001 standard, BS 8001, has 6 principles. And I think the 6 principles are all relevant to every organization. And I'll list them. So systems thinking, and Andrew's already touched on this. Innovation, which is what we all do when we look to design a new system, a new approach, a new enterprise. Collaboration, which we've already spoken about, which is key to circularity. Stewardship, we need to take responsibility and ultimately protect the world we live in, and stewardship is vitally important to this. Optimization, so making sure we optimize what we have, the resources we have, the people we have, the systems we have. We need to optimize them all. And the last one is transparency, being open about the impacts we have, being honest with ourselves, being honest with our collaborators, and ultimately making sure that we coming together, we can solve these problems and ultimately deliver better solutions for the future. So I'll hand it back to you, Anna.
Thanks, Owen, and thank you, Andrew, as well. It's great to hear that there are so many sort of industry scale projects going on a number of the sites in Wales, and seeing these benefits of the symbiosis between those and other sectors, as you say. But we can't only think about industry as one sort of alone sector, but bringing in, as you say, agriculture and some of the other ones where the byproducts can be used elsewhere, or waste heat opportunities, as Chris mentioned, can also be utilised. So if we're just thinking about those 6 principles that Owen has just brought up, obviously we've talked a bit about the collaboration side of it, and I think, as you say, transparency is a big barrier and challenge for sort of achieving the ambitions of circular economy for some much larger organisations who may not see the value of sharing, confidential information, for example, with their neighbours, but trying to demonstrate that actually if we have these open conversations, then progress can happen at a much steadier pace, and hopefully those barriers will start to be broken down, and the ambitions that are set out both by the UK, Welsh Government, but also by the individual organisations themselves. So if we're just thinking about sort of those opportunities in let's say, the most immediate future, are there any that we think Wales should be focusing on? Are there sort of key areas which Wales has, which maybe other parts of the UK don't have, which we can utilise to help demonstrate value of this circularity and sort of what those most immediate opportunities are. I'll hand to Owen first, if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, I think one thing we need to realize is that we already have a lot of information. We have a lot of data out there in terms of Welsh Government's access to data, NRW's access to data, but I don't think we're utilizing the data effectively. And I think if we were to, again, looking at the idea of transparency and the idea of collaboration, if we were to start to look at the system and understanding what the system can offer, I think the data we already have can provide a lot of additional information, which can help all of us really to develop solutions and deliver those solutions. I think, going back to my point about waste, I think waste, if we assume resources are waste, then we'll treat them as waste. We want to get rid of them. We want them out of sight, out of mind. And ultimately, they're all valuable resources because they've gone through a whole process of extraction, of manipulation in terms of manufacturing, of marketing and sales, and every bit of equipment, every bit of waste, as we call it, has gone through this process. So at some point there was a value generated or value associated with this waste. So ultimately we need to understand where that value is and what that value was, and again try to extract that value back from the process. One thing I didn't mention actually within the SWIC initiative is the plan for clean growth, which is another project that I think Chris had mentioned. But within that plan is the concept of clean growth hubs, and the idea will be that we will have a series of clean growth hubs across the region, and around those clean growth hubs will be the opportunity to develop new solutions, to utilize the resources that we have from the anchor companies, and to utilize those as feedstocks into other industries. So to just, I suppose, to scale up perhaps the technology and the initiatives that are happening with rice, but also other initiatives and learning from other areas where we can start to generate a more sustainable, clean growth, and ultimately start to deliver some of the solutions that we know are possible when we start incorporating the principles, again, of circularity, but also of the Future Generations Act. I think Wales have a phenomenal opportunity here and a phenomenal resource in the Future Gen Act that can generate real value, not only to Wales as an economy, but as a knowledge base. And I think we have, these are areas where we can start delivering solutions now.
Great, thank you, Owen. Chris, do you have anything further to add on that?
Thanks to Owen for mentioning clean growth hubs. I had that down for one of my answers for one of the questions, and Owen's right, that potentially feeds in, pulling in the learnings of rice, developing off rice, and pulling that into that concept. And I think, as I said, a lot of us already work quite closely together as industry. As Andrew said, by pulling in other sectors, that's going to be vitally important to us. But one area as well we haven't got to is looking at the products that we all make, and the life cycle, the circular economy elements of the products that we make. So I think it would be good for us to start a mapping process in terms of understanding that, and seeing if there are any things we can exploit in that as well as individual companies, but together. I think that's quite a way away before we get to that point. We're focusing on symbiosis and opportunities that brings, but our product and product end use and circular economy of our product is something we shouldn't forget and build into our plans going forward.
Great, thanks, Chris. Andrew, is there anything further you wanted to, maybe if there are other opportunities that the RISE project are looking at going forward, on top of the Rockwool one that's currently in development?
Yes, we have a number of different components which we're working with, including an off-grid campsite, which in itself will end up becoming zero emission because of what we're working on. So the idea is that lessons you learn from implication on major industry you can use for the we'll call it entertainment, relaxation industries, whatever, but also just for the public in general. I think there's two other things I think we need to consider with all of this. First is government legislation. There are a number of different laws that were put in place, legislation that was put in place for a specific reason 50 years ago. However, those are inhibiting a true circular economy. They're inhibiting reuse of materials for applications outside of a specific area. And I think now's the time for government to sit down and think about, yes, the reasons these requirements were put in place was because of specific time, an issue at that time. We're now in a different environment. We're in a different time. We have different challenges. And I'm not saying that means we need to be able to dump hazardous chemicals everywhere. What I'm saying is there are opportunities that are against the law at the moment, which there is no rational scientific reason to do so. And so, for example, I'll take one example, is that, if you're doing a bio system generating through fermentation or algal growth or something similar of generating a food product, at the moment you can't use nitrate and phosphate that came from animal waste. Even though you can go to a farmer's market and buy lettuce that used natural fertilizer to grow that lettuce, if you take that same fertilizer, do an algal growth on it, separate out the pure protein, which is absolutely 100% pure, legally it cannot be used for human consumption. And these are things which came from bizarre rationales many years ago. And I think Chris can also add, I know within his industry, there are opportunities to use, we'll call it recycled material, waste material, in different ways, but they're actually not allowed to do so. So I think that that's one thing we do need to think about, is what was applicable previously may no longer be applicable. Now, we don't need to sacrifice safety or health because of that, but I think there are things that need to be changed. The second thing is, and this is something that the RISE project, I think, uniquely is trying to address, is it's not just science and engineering. It's not just the industries that are the end users of technology. It's not the SMEs that are developing technology and implementing it. It's actually the general public. And I think one of the components of the RISE project is, it sounds weird, but is storytelling. It's the ability to try and find what the general public, what politicians, what people who work for companies, whether it's the researchers or development, is management, if it's the workforce, how they perceive the impacts of these things. Because make no mistake, as we adopt the circular economy, as we adopt reducing industrial emissions, as we go to net zero, there is a cost for all this. And therefore, there needs to be a conversation between all of us about how we perceive that cost and the value of that cost. And you could think of it back in the early days of free range chickens' eggs. There was always a significant difference in price, and people had to make a decision, a conscious decision, that I'm going to go for free range because of the perceived benefits and what that means, as opposed to factory farming. And I think there needs to be that conversation with the general public, with the end consumers, that there is that need, that they're understanding there is always going to be a cost to this, as we've seen through COVID, and now with the crisis in Ukraine, the invasion in Ukraine, there is always a kick-on effect financially. And I think that's a conversation we should have up front, to be able to not only get opinions from everybody, but also to disseminate the advantages and disseminate the rationale for doing this. And I think that's something which most, certainly academic technical projects miss, and is something we've tried to address.
If I could add a little bit to that, Andrew, I think we have a responsibility. I think to be able to tell stories, to explain in whatever way we need to, or whatever way we have to explain to the general public, as all the positive things we are doing, and making sure that they're aware that it's important that they be behind these sort of initiatives, and also being able to tell a story back to governments to say, look, governments, like industry in the past, have been focused on very linear approaches and working in their silos, whereas we need to start to understand the system and develop solutions on a systemic basis, and therefore be able to tell a story as to how that is actually making sense and making benefit to society. So I think storytelling is vitally important. I think we have an obligation to be able to tell stories in all our fields, whether that be in industry or academia or anything else, or the political arena. We need to be able to tell a story and make sure everyone understands what it is we're trying to do. Okay, we've lost Hannah.
I think, Owen, and let me follow on from that, waiting. I think the other thing we need to have is, you talked about transparency, and it's a bit like Alcoholics Anonymous. The first step is to admit you're an alcoholic. I think that industry and the general public and government and everybody, the first step is for everyone to admit that there's a problem and admit that they're part of that problem. And that then says we realize this is an issue. We understand that there is issues of waste, of plastic waste. That's one thing we kind of draw on, but and then say, but we understand there's a problem. Now let's start thinking. Let's have that conversation of how we can together overcome that problem. But I do think it is important that no matter who the industry is, no matter which agency it is, which group of the public it is, everyone needs to take that, put their hand up and say, yes, I'm part of that problem, and this is what I will do, and this is what we all need to do together. And how do we do that? What's the best way of doing it, of accomplishing it? Because we can all act as a critic to somebody else, but it's always very difficult to be able to stand up and say, yes, this really is a problem of my making in part, and this is what we're going to do about it. And I think then that does in turn change your behavior. So, of course, the classic example is Wales first to adopt the no recyclable plastic bags, or a ban for plastic bags. And I can remember when England adopted it, there was outrage, whereas on this side of the border, everyone was used to it, and we got used to it, and it became second nature to do it. But I think that's the type of thing that it's that evolution of behavior that you need to first initiate with saying, yep, there's a problem, and we're all part of it, but let's talk about how we solve it.
It's interesting you use that analogy, because I when I talk about the linear economy, I talk about it in the sense of it's an addiction. We as a society, we've been addicted to a linear economy for quite a long time, and several thousand years actually. But yeah, and it is the fact that that's all we know and that's all we're used to. So it's a challenge to get away from that linear addiction and move on to something that's a different way of viewing society, viewing the world around us. But certainly it needs to happen, and we need to again be able to talk through these addictions.
I think the interesting part is, and there's a second example, but the first one was the UK government's net zero legislation. I think the initial reaction from everybody was shock, surprise, and there's no way we're going to be able to do that. But now we're all talking about trying to solve it. Whether we get there or not is something else, but at least everyone's doing it. In France, they recently announced that I think it's by 2030, there'll be no more plastic packaging at all. And so I've been engaged in conversations with a number of different industries looking at alternatives. It's things like that. When you're given a challenge that has an end point, that's when it galvanizes people into doing something. And I think in some ways there is nothing better than being forced to do something given a time frame. It's a challenge, you have to meet it. And I think for the UK, this has been probably one of the best developments that has happened, because we now all have to think about this. We all have to do something about it. It provides a massive challenge, but at the same time, it's probably one of the biggest opportunities for everyone. And I think you can relate it to 1962, when Kennedy announced that by the end of the decade, the US would put a man on the moon. At the time, no one could see how it would be done, but the challenge was there, and the challenge was met. But it was an incredible technology development, implementation, business, the public, education, all had to come together. And I think that's the kind of thing that we need to focus on, is create that challenge and make sure that we all have to do something for it.
No, I agree. However, I would question the scope of that challenge, because if we look at decarbonisation as an example, and we look at decarbonisation in isolation, what we end up is a lot of electric vehicles, a lot of wind turbines, a lot of solar PVs on roofs. But if all of those technologies are designed within a linear economy, we still end up with a much bigger impact both ends of that supply chain. So we're extracting virgin critical resources from the likes of the Congo or Mongolia, and we're ending up with piles and piles of waste. And it is waste because we haven't actually designed in the solution at the end. Whereas if we start to decarbonize a circular economy, we've already given provision and a design strategy to, or the strategic design solution to the sourcing of raw materials and to the recovery of those resources at the end of life. And we build in solutions in between. But if we just look at it in decarbonization in isolation, we end up with bigger problems, I think. And that's something we need to understand, we need to address, and make sure we don't repeat the mistakes we've made in the past.
I think the last, following on from that, one of the other issues is you can't decarbonize yourself at the expense of somebody else. So there are several projects that are being touted, for example, for green hydrogen, or I should say for hydrogen, not green hydrogen, that's the point, where a region is saying they're going to adopt hydrogen as their only fuel, no natural gas. Wow, we're going to be wonderful, we'll approach net zero. The only problem is they're having the hydrogen made in a different part of the country by steam reforming, which is emitting carbon dioxide. So all you're doing is moving it around. And I'll follow your example. I once did the calculation, if Wales decided to switch to 100% EV cars over a period of 10 years, you would decimate the environment of Argentina and Bolivia, because that's the majority of the lithium mines around the globe. And so really you're just pushing the problem onto somebody else. And I think we really can't do that. It has to be a solution within ourselves, whether it's recycling, repurposing, taking raw materials that normally you thought of as waste and using them in a different way. I think that becomes the most important thing, because not only do you isolate yourselves from external forces to a certain degree, but also you're limiting the impact, you're limiting the damage you're doing to other regions, wherever that is. And so I think that is you're right, that's a vitally important component of all this.
Thank you both.
I just want to add one thing. Sorry, Hannah. Just for people that are listening, through these discussions that we've been having, through these investigations, through this mapping, it's helping us move forward as a region. But it is also attracting inward investment. We're hoping that LanzaTech will be building their first UK plant in our region. LanzaTech is such an exciting company, following on from a lot of work that Professor Andy Barron's doing in Rice, in terms of recycling, as Owen will shout at me for calling waste carbon, but in terms of recycling carbon into valuable chemical feedstock. So they're working with Unilever on supply chain. They're even making dresses now with Cara out of CO2. So they're working on CO2 capture from the air, CO2 capture from industry, but also from maybe domestic waste as well. So there are alternative mechanisms, inward investments coming into the region that will help us tackle some of the issues that we know we're struggling to tackle. So there's a whole new industry coming into the area as well.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, no, as Chris said, very, very interesting conversations, and it just shows how, how this space is evolving in the region, but also elsewhere. And as you mentioned, Andrew, sort of the pressure from other parts of the world who are looking at other solutions, or for example, trying to rid their country of plastic waste. It puts that pressure on the other countries in the other parts of the world to do something similar, and it feels as though we are starting to move in the right direction. But as we've touched on today, there are still a number of barriers in the way of achieving the ambitions that we need to achieve, and that collaboration piece is massive, and is so vital for the success of it, not only with, as people have already mentioned, sort of the key large industries, or a couple of the sectors, or even just thinking of sort of the business world, but also bringing in the likes of academia, government, regulatory bodies who are in charge of dictating what can and can't be done in terms of those, and what barriers are in place hindering the progress of that. So I just want to close out, and just want to thank Chris and Owen and Andrew again for joining us today. As I say, it's been really, really informative, and some really, really interesting discussions. So thank you very much for your contributions, and thank you to everyone for joining.
Thank you, Hannah. And yes, totally agree. Really interesting session. Diolch yn fawr iawn I Hannah, Chris, Owen ag Andrew. We've had a lovely comment in the chat from Kelly, and I'm sure you all agree with this. Excellent session, leaving us with so much food for thought. Let's get on with it. Thank you all. Okay, so now we have a question and answer session, and I'm delighted to say that Dr. Chris Williams is with us to answer the questions. We've had a few questions coming in, but just before we start, I have to say I loved what Owen was saying about finding a new word for waste, because I was thinking about this during the session, and I actually Googled, other words for waste, and they're all negative. So I was looking for a nice word for waste. It doesn't exist. So we have to kind of change our mindset and see it as a kind of resource, don't we?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a question in from Kieran. Kieran's been with us for most of the series, which is great. Thank you, Kieran. So first of all, he's commenting that we're creating further issues with the linear measures. Wind turbines create vibration that massively affects the life in the sea and land. But his question actually is, he's working on a net negative workshop and charity with a long-term aim to develop a patch of land with a permaculture outlook and growth development of alternative food sources. Actually, that's not a question. It's a statement, but it's good to hear. Yeah. So it's lovely. So Kieran has been. Lots of people have been sharing their ideas, which is great. So people attending can see what other people are doing, because with the circular economy, sharing is good. Okay, so we'll go to a question now rather than a statement. This is from Gary Rawlings.
Sorry, sure. Sean. Can I see those, or can I have those? People that have made.
Yes, of course. Yeah, we can send you a copy of that.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so question coming in from Gary. Thank you, Gary. Well, it was actually what does each panel member, but it's all on you, Chris. What would you like to see coming out of today's budget for industry?
That's a big question.
It's a good one to start.
That's on. Yeah, put me on the spot as well. I think as long as we've got policies that are coming through that are long term, that are going to support us down the route of net zero and circular economy, then that needs to be built in to what comes through. In terms of short term, of course, we're all struggling with energy prices at the moment, causing huge problems. In terms of as larger industries, we pay UK ETS, so emission trading scheme or carbon tax, effectively. That's hitting us really badly at the moment because the prices are high. And I know in some ways people will say that's good because that's more of an incentive for us to decarbonise. But the problem is the infrastructure is not there yet for us to decarbonise. So you're paying a tax in effect that's supposed to help you decarbonise, but if you actually can't, it's just a cost. which on top of high energy prices is a real challenge. So, and without us being able to, be sustainable businesses in the short term, it makes it difficult for us to invest in the long term. So I suppose some immediate help around UK ETS energy pricing, hopefully then being, enabling us to focus on the longer term.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. Okay, so another question we've had is, do all businesses have a role in progressing the circular economy? I mean, I actually, apart from doing this work, I have a very small company, and I tend to think I'm so small that I don't really count. But listening today, I think we all need to kind of make, even if they're very small steps.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And I think that's why when Owen talked about the Cardiff Circular Economy grouping, I think it'll be interesting for us to see what comes through that. And then we're interested to understand how we take that sort of wider with industry being much more engaged maybe than it used to be as well. So typically you might have had groups of SMEs or public sector and industry separately, but hopefully through that it's a new way of combining all sectors together.
So the next question actually links back to that. So Kelly's based in South Wales. How does she get involved in the Circular Economy Hub?
I think the best answer for that is we'll tie in with Owen, because Owen is our sort of circular economy champion. And in terms of SWIC and industry, by all means tie in with us. And then, as Owen said, we're looking to develop these clean growth hubs, which will work with the councils, the industry, and more local stakeholders. We'll try and engage those locally. And it's that Cardiff project that Owen's involved with is our trial project that we'll develop.
Okay, so kind of keep your eyes peeled for the next developments. Basically.
Yeah. If they connect with us, and then we'll build connections into the plan.
Okay, so they can go to the Green Ambition kind of link in Business Wales, yes, and then they will.
Or there's a SWIC website as well with the contact details, swic.cymru, and come through that way as well.
Lovely. Okay, brilliant. So what do you see as the main contributions from SMEs?
That's varied, actually. It's in terms of SMEs will have skills that we might appreciate, use, and not have ourselves. Also, SMEs can typically tend to be more nimble and trial and develop and scale things up that big industry can learn from. And also, in bigger industry can't do everything itself, and it needs to work with SMEs to help it achieve its own targets as well. So as direct supply chain benefit. So it's through engagement and sharing, and really just seeing what happens, and also sorry, I'm blabbering a little bit here, aren't I? But also in terms of SMEs. As I said, can be more nimble, so they can maybe demonstrate things for bigger industry to see, visualize, help understand, and then bigger industry can scale it up and use it on a larger scale to help it, but also the region. But I think typically SMEs, because we're looking for new technologies, new techniques, they'll typically come through as SMEs, maybe through university projects or maybe existing SMEs. New ways of communicating, new ways of mapping, new ways of collaborating. All those, I think, will come out of SMEs because bigger industries stuck in sort of corporate systems. So it's not just in the practicalities and the technical aspects, it's also about the way things are done as well and communicated.
Brilliant. So what are the key elements to progress the circular economy agenda in Wales, do you think?
I think I'm really not the right person to be answering that question, really. It should be Owen, who's here. Unfortunately, couldn't make it this morning. But as bigger industries, we've come together through this SWIC. We managed to get some support funding from Innovate UK, from this Transforming Foundation Industries, which is what I talked through, which got us together to collaborate, to map and explore our material and energy opportunities and understand how that fitted into the circular economy challenge. We're starting to work more closely then with Welsh Government and circular economy team, which is a really strong team. They've got really clever people there that can see things, are involved in all sorts of global projects as well. So we can use that as a mechanism to support us on our journey, and that's where we're hoping as SWIC, it'll help build some stronger bridges between the different groups and aid collaboration. And I think that's the first major step we're going through in terms of circular economy. Obviously, individually, our industries are focused on their product and their life cycle analysis and their supply chain in terms of carbon mapping and circular economy benefits, life cycle analysis. But then stepping back as a region and trying to work then about what challenges each company's got, what opportunities that presents, one for supporting the development of circular economy, but also inward investment and generation of new jobs in the area.
Thank you. So
I think I think in terms of steps, I think it is that just continuing the collaboration, growing that collaboration, coming up with ways for us to map, explore and develop with universities, with SMEs. It's sort of formalizing that structure. So within the way we're looking to configure SWIC as it hopefully becomes more formal over the next year, is we're looking to create sort of common interest groups, and circular economy, industrial symbiosis will be one of those common interest groups, and that'll be run almost, I don't want to say the word committee, but run as a group within SWIC with a particular focus, and that will have its own stakeholder engagement mechanism and plans and drive. So that's the sort of management step we see.
Brilliant. So Kieran's come back to ask you if there are any plans to lower prices on parts for products to incentivize reuse. This is Kieran, who is doing the net negative workshop and the patch of land with permaculture outlook and growth development of alternative food sources.
I suppose I don't think there are any. Yeah, I suppose everybody is in business to make money, but at the same time, everybody is in competition with each other, and therefore the market tends to fix the price. But you can only make things if people buy them, so they have to be priced at the right level to enable people to buy them. So they should fit within a market. So are there plans to reduce product prices? I don't know.
So we need to encourage more people to be actually using them. I think Andrew was saying, wasn't it? We've got to acknowledge there's a problem and actually get people to buy them. Yeah,
I suppose that's a particularly difficult question at the moment, isn't it, with energy prices, inflation. But I suppose we all hope that, don't we, that we and we all understand that there will be fewer products made as well because of the circular economy. There will be fewer products made because hopefully fewer will, the products will last longer and there won't be an end of life, or the end of life cycle will be further away.
And we'll have our nice new word for waste.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so given all the talk, I think this is our final question at the moment. Given all the talk around net zero, should efforts be focused on the energy side?
Yes and no. They're so interlinked in our mind in terms of if you follow what Owen said in terms of circular economy, the products are lasting longer, They can be reused, recycled. So you need to make less product, in which case then you need less energy to make your initial products. We are doing a lot of work on energy in terms of the generation of energy, but also the move away from fossil fuel combustion in industry. So in SWIC, our main focus is on energy, but what we're trying to understand is, as we transition to a net zero world, so we're using renewable energy, we're using hydrogen, we've got carbon capture utilization, we've got maybe carbon capture storage. Our configurations of our manufacturing units are going to change. What products are we going to need to make for that net zero world, and how does that fit into the configuration of our manufacturing units? And then we start to understand how we build circular economy and life cycle analysis within that stream of predicting what the future looks like. So the focus is on getting to net zero and making things in a net zero way through the energy choices or the energy inputs that we have for heating, for example. But within that, we're building circular economy into how we think our products will be used and made in the future as well.
Okay,
so
and
should
tomorrow
it be on
actually
energy? It is on energy, but we're trying to make sure we build circular economy within what we do. Because I suppose we're not in charge of the market as such, are we? We're just looking at, we make things in our region, and we're trying to make sure that the way that we make them fits into a circular economy thinking by eliminating waste, by calling everything a byproduct that can be reused or resold. But also we recognize individually the products we make need to fit into that futuristic circular economy. And then we need to understand how the energy inputs that we need are, provide zero emission, hopefully, or net zero at the very least.
Lovely, because that links into tomorrow. We've got a session tomorrow looking at, aiming to help companies business through innovation, and that could be looking at things like focusing on product design or the life cycle of products, etc. How, moving from a linear economy to the circular economy. So we're going to be kind of covering that tomorrow in our session
great.
at 10 o'clock. Well, that's it for the questions for now. Chris, diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I hope that people attending have found the session informative. I'm sure you have. We're back at 2 o'clock this afternoon. We've got a session on making the transition to ultra-low emission vehicles. O'n i'n nôl am 2 o'r gloch pnawn 'ma ar gyfer sesiwn arall. A'r sesiwn yn mynd i ddelio gyda symud i gerbydau allyriadau isel iawn. Dwi dal yn dysgu lot o eiriau newydd Cymraeg. Diolch fawr am ymuno gyda ni heddi. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have missed a session, you can always catch up by going to the main room on Eventbox and click on the session that you'd like to see. But for now, diolch yn fawr iawn am gadw cwmni i ni. Thank you so much for being with us. We're back at 2 o'clock.